Hi folks, this is Karim Raouf from IT Visualizer Talent. Today we will continue our lab, the transformers. This is the video number 35th or 35, okay, 35th video. This video we will continue working with the ADSA, Active Directory Security Assessment documentation. This document was submitted by a user called Hyuka. This document focus on the security for the Active Directory, some best practices for the security of the Active Directory, and some best practice also for the backup of the Active Directory, which Active Directory elements should be backed up. For example, you need to back up your DHCP if you have one, DHCP configuration, and if you have a DNS, you should also back up the DNS, and some best practices concerning the group policy. This is from the security point. If you want to harden your Active Directory security, so you need to have a look on this documentation, which is very good. We have been working in this documentation for about 4 videos or 3 videos. This is the last one. This is the last video that we will discuss the rest of the documentation. In the previous video we have already discussed another part of this documentation, and we were discussing how after we have set up the BackupExec Veritas 20.6 as a backup solution, okay, to back up our Active Directory, and how to set up a backup job on the BackupExec Veritas 20.6, and how to back up this this backup job, or how this backup job we can put it on a tape. As I said before, we will create a virtual tape drive. This is by using a software called Starwind Virtual Tape Library. In the previous video we have seen how this can be set up. We have set up the Starwind Virtual Tape Library, and after the virtual tape is functioning and in action, we use the Veritas BackupExec 20.6 to make 2 backup jobs for our Active Directory on the virtual tape drive that we have created using the Starwind virtual tape library. And we have seen this video in the previous video how this is done. So in this video we will continue working with, as I said before, with the Active Directory Security Assessment. This is the last video that we will discuss this document, because actually it is almost finished. So let's begin the video. Actually, in the previous video also I have already downloaded two software or 2 PowerShell scripts that Hyuka uses to inspect the Active Directory security. One of them is called ACL. This is a script, PowerShell script he uses to see the security rights on the different Active Directory objects. For example, if you have an organization unit, for example, called computers, okay, so with this PowerShell it displays what is the security setting on this organization unit. For example, who has the right, for example, of this organization unit. For example, you can, for example, put the domain admins on this organization unit, that they are the only ones who can delete something from this organization unit to add something to this organization unit. Okay, so basically he will use this ACL PowerShell script to display the security setting for every organizational unit, not only the organizational units in the Active Directory, but all of the objects in the Active Directory. And he has some best practice concerning some Active Directory objects. For example, he recommends some of these Active Directory objects to have certain groups on it, and to remove some groups from this and remove some groups from this certain Active Directory objects. So let's begin and see how this is done. So here this is the file. This is the one that will go to this website to download. It's called ADACL scanner. This is the program that we will use to display the security setting for any Active Directory object in the Active Directory domain. We will see how this is done if you can wait for a couple of seconds. Here we will first power on the first domain controller. We will press enter. So now we have our first domain controller up and running. We will now run the script. Okay, it's called ADSA scanner. This is a PowerShell script. You can download it from something called GitHub. This is a very famous website that contains a lot of scripts submitted by a lot of users. So we will get, it's called ADSA scanner and Bloodhound. This is the two programs that Yuka uses in his document, or he recommended to be used by his document to scan the Active Directory for different security setting. Okay, so here we'll just the file that I have downloaded these two files, and they are zipped files, so we will extract them. So now we will open it, and then we should run this through the PowerShell. If you run it through the PowerShell, it will not work. You need to open the Active Directory PowerShell module. We will see how this is done also. You should not run it in the normal PowerShell. You should run it through the Active Directory PowerShell mode. Okay, here I am telling him to execute. He's asking if this is the default policy in the domain, that it's not allowed as the default Active Directory group policy that running scripts is not allowed. Okay, so you need to tell him when you run any script that he's saying the execution policy protects us from scripts that you do not trust. So he is telling us that this script should not be running because it is not trusted, or any script that you want to run, it will not be trusted because this is the default group policy. Default group policy says that it's not permitted to run any scripts. Okay, so I am telling him, so he's telling us, are you sure you want to run this script? So we tell him yes to all. Okay, but actually when we run this script or run this PowerShell script, it doesn't work. So we need to open the Active Directory PowerShell module. We will see how this is done. Okay, so let's begin. Here we'll right click on the script and tell him to edit. Or sorry, not edit, we need to right click and tell him to run it. I think no, we will, okay, I think this is not the correct. We will need to open the PowerShell menu from the start. We will have to open the start. Sorry, we'll tell him not edit, tell him open. Right click and open. This is the Windows PowerShell ISE. Okay, so you have already opened it, and then we will click on the play or on the execute. So here we got the program or the interface for the program. Here we will tell him to connect. Okay, as soon as we tell him connect, he will get the Active Directory structure. Here we can see that he is getting our transformers.local infrastructure. So here we'll go to the documentation and then see what Hyuka is best practice, or what he is recommending us to see, or what to where to look in our Active Directory setting or security setting. Which setting or security setting should we focus on? So he's telling us here to focus on we will click on the top level domain, Active Directory domain level, which is this one. Here we will just a minute. Here wants us to check the security setting for this DC equal transformers, DC equal local. This is the top domain level object, okay, or this is the top level domain. We can see this is the top level domain object. He wants us to click on it, and then we leave everything as it is, and then he is telling us here objects to scan. We will scan only the OUs. We need only the OUs to checks, or the organizational units, and we will get an output in HTML telling us the security setting for the top domain level object in an HTML file. Okay, here is the destination that will he will save this HTML5 in it. So we leave everything as it is. Type scan, we leave it as DACL, which is access. Okay, domain access level. I think this is DCL. What we are concerned that we leave everything as is, and then we tell him to run the scan to get the security setting for the top domain level object. So let's see this. Tell him to run scan. We will get to the documentation and see. Okay, we will run the scan, because actually the documentation says to leave everything as is and to run a scan on the top domain top level object. Here you can see this is all the groups, the Active Directory groups that have access to the top level domain, or on the top level domain, or the domain as a whole, transformers.local. Here we can see, for example, that domain admins have full control on the domain level object. Here you can see that it can create child, self, write, property, generic, read, everything. So as I said before, we are seeing here the access rights for the domain object of domain top level object, okay, which is transformers.local. Transformers.local here, this is an object, okay, this is like an OU, okay, something we can refer it as an OU, okay. This is the top level OU for the domain controller, which is transformers.local. This is the top level OU, organization unit, okay. It's not like an organization unit, but or it's not also we can refer it as an organization unit, but we will just say that it is like an organizational unit, okay. So he's telling us who has access to the organizational unit, which is called transformers.local. Here we can see this is all of the Active Directory groups that have access to this object. So here we will see what Hyuka is recommending for this object to have, or which Active Directory groups that should have access to this object. Here we'll tell him to export, okay, and then he will save it in this destination. You can change destination as you like, but we tell him export. It was exported as an HTML file. So now we will go to the documentation and see what Yuka is recommending us for recommending as a security practice on this object, or this Active Directory object, which is transformers.local. He's recommending that some users or some groups should have access to this organization, so this object, and some shouldn't have. Okay, he won't run both on, first we will run it on transformers.local, and then we will run it on the users organizational unit, Active Directory users organizational unit. We will run both. He is saying here, okay, you can get a little bit back. Here we can see that he is, after we have the scan, we report made to display all the access control list that has been set on the domain object. Okay, so transformers.local, okay, here with a different name, but transformers.local it's called domain object. So we were scanning the domain object and see which groups and users have access to the domain object. Okay, so here we will see his recommendation concerning this domain object. So transformers.local is called domain object. Okay, it's like organizational, but it's not organizational, it is called domain object. Okay, so here also telling us, after scanning the domain object, we will scan the organization unit for the Active Directory users, which here in our case it's AI users. Okay, here we can see that we have also scanned the organizational unit of our transformers.local, which calls, so we are scanning our organization unit for the transformers.local domain, which is AI users. This organization unit is called AI users. This is the organization unit that contains all of our transformers.local users, Active Directory users. So here this is all our or this is the Active Directory groups that have access to the organization unit that is called AI users, which contains all of our transformers.local users, Active Directory users. So here we can see that we have account operators. Okay, this is as per recommendation of Yuka, you should not have any users in this groups or this Active Directory built-in group, because this Active Directory built-in group has a lot of rights, not only for account operators, but exceeds, okay, or have excessive rights that should not be used. Okay, so it have, I mean that this Active Directory built-in group has excessive groups, not only for managing the Active Directory accounts, but more than that. So his recommendation that this groups should not or this group should not have any members in it. In a previous video we have checked this, and we are sure that no one is a member of this group. So this Active Directory built-in group is empty of any members. So we can see here that it contains, or this have an access to the organization unit of users. As I said before, we don't need to bother ourselves, because even though that this, as I said before, this group have excessive rights, but we don't have members in it, so we don't need to bother ourselves. Okay, it's there, but there is no members in it. Okay, so we can see that also domain admins have rights. We can leave this, and system and authenticated users have only allow only to read permissioned, and list permissions and read only, and enterprise domain controllers that has also read and as whatsoever, blah, blah, blah. Everyone delete 3 or delete delete 3 or delete. I think this is also this is deny. Okay, deny access to deletes. Okay, so everyone should not have don't delete 3 or something. So as a best practice, and also the print operators should not also contain any members. Okay, and also we have seen this in a previous video. We can see that we don't have any members in the account operators or in the printer operators. So now we don't need to be worried, because even though, as I said before, you should not give this Active Directory built-in groups any permissions on any domain object or Active Directory object, but we don't have any members in these groups, so we don't need to bother ourselves with. Okay, so let's can we hold for a second? So let's continue now. As I said before, we are scanning the organization unit for our users. Okay, and we can see here that we need to make sure that the account operators and the printer operators groups doesn't contain any members. Okay, as I said before, because this built-in Active Directory groups have excessive rights. Okay, so now we have checked our organization unit for the users, and we have confirmed that there is no security issues with this object or with this organizational unit for the users. Here we are going to check to see if the account operators, okay, and the printer operators has any members in it, just to make sure, because it's not recommended as per HIUCA HIUCA document that this group should not contain any users. So here we can see that there is no members in it. As we can see here, account operators, even though that they have access or they have rights on the OU of users of our Active Directory domain, but there is no members in it, so we are safe. So we go to the printer operators. We can see here also that doesn't contain any members, and also even though it have access on our have access or our organization unit of the users of our Active Directory, even though they have this group have access, but it doesn't contain any members. So we are now we are going with the documentation, or we are successful from this point, or we don't have an issue with our security issue with our Active Directory security setting concerning the domain object and the organization unit of the users, okay, as per the documentation of HIUCA. And this is some description for every security setting or security permissions. This is for every security permission. There is a description, so you can refer to it if you need to know which rights is suitable for your groups or Active Directory groups or users. Here he is saying to us that the organizational unit for the domain controllers, you should not give any user or any group full rights on this group. We can see here now, for example, that the organization unit for the domain controllers should only contains authenticated users. Okay, we will see now the things that we should have. We'll click on advance. Here we can see that you should only have users, okay, authenticated users, domain admins, system, enterprise domain controllers, all of this enterprise admins, okay, all of this this is normal groups or users that the OU of the domain controllers should contain. Okay, so now we can see that this is these groups this is normal to have these groups and users on the active on the organization unit of the domain controllers in the Active Directory. This is normal. As for HIUCA, he is saying that you should check the security groups or the Active Directory security groups that is allowed to have access on the organizational unit of the domain controllers. All of this are normal. If you have, for example, any other Active Directory group, either of these groups, then you should remove them immediately. We can see here on this example in his documentation. For example, here we can see that there is a user called Paul West that have full access to the OU of the domain controllers or the organizational unit of the domain controllers, so you should remove it immediately. Okay, he is saying that you should not give any user any full access to domain controllers OU. Okay, he is saying us and saying this one. And there is another thing, we need to check the computer object or the server object for the domain controller. For example, we have here we can see that we have two domain controllers with two names, which is, we will see that now in a moment. If this is normal groups, okay. We will go to the server object itself. We will see that in a moment. Here is saying that we should not give any user full control on the DC or the domain controller computer object. Okay, we will check, we have two domain controllers, we will check the two domain controllers computer objects and see if we have any user that have full control on this DC computer objects. Okay, which I mean, DC is the domain controller computers object. We will see that now in a moment. If you have anything like this, for example, have a user that have full access to the domain controller computer object, you should remove them immediately. For example, here we can see that in the domain controllers OU we have two domain controller computer objects. We should check the security setting on them. If there is any user that have full access to these computers, we should remove them immediately. As in the example that Yuka is referring to in his PDF or documentation. Okay, so we will go to the right click the computer and go to the security and check the Active Directory users and group that have access to this domain controller computer object. We can see that nothing. Everything seems normal, and we don't have any user that have access or full access to the domain controllers. So here we are good to go, or as we said before, we have this security point checked or successful. He's also saying for us that you should not delegate any rights. For example, let's wait for a second. Here, for example, is saying to us that you should not give any group Active Directory. For example, if you have an engineering Active Directory group, you should not give them any domain administrator rights. For example, if you want the engineering group to, for example, remove some Active Directory users from certain groups, okay, you should not delegate the whole group. Okay, the whole group, give them the whole rights. You should give it to one person only. You should not give it to the whole group. He's saying here that you should only delegate rights to users, not to the whole group. Okay. And here he's also telling us that you should also check and see if in your Active Directory built-in there is an Active Directory built-in group that is named domain admins. You should check if there is any suspicious users or any users in this group. You should monitor this Active Directory built-in group carefully and to see if there is any users you don't need them to be in this group, because this group has full rights to the Active Directory domain structure. Here we can see that there is nothing here. The security, this is the group. This is the Active Directory domain admins security group properties. Here we can see also that in the security, here I am saying that, sorry, in this, let's refer back here again. The documentation says that you should check the security group object, okay, which is named domain admins. Okay, there is a group or a built-in Active Directory group that is called domain admins. You should right click this security group and check the security tab in it and see if there is any users or any unwanted users on this security group. Okay, on this security group, I mean to access this security group, okay, not to be a member of it. We will see here is saying to us that remove delegated users or groups from administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, and the equivalent. This creates different escalation to domain admin. Okay, he's saying that you should not, just a minute, it creates escalation passes for attackers to escalate the privilege to the domain admin. Here he say that when users have right all properties on the domain admins group, allowing everyone to make themselves as domain admins. Here is saying to us that you should make sure that there is nothing in the domain admins Active Directory groups. Okay, should not give any Active Directory group full rights to this domain admins Active Directory security group. So we will check this. He is saying that domain users, in this example, domain users have access to this security group, so anyone in the domain users Active Directory group, Active Directory users group should become a domain admin. Okay, so we will check the domain admins and see in the security. Here we can see that the members are the TR_IT group. Here we can see in the security tab that no one have access to this group except of the domain admins, enterprise admins, and administrators. Authenticated user has only the read right. You cannot do anything except for read, so you cannot edit, add, delete anyone from this group. Also for the enterprise admins, we will check and see if in the security tab, okay, authenticated users have only read right, you don't have anything to do. So you're checking the rights. You need to make sure that only authenticated users have the read rights on these groups. For example, in the schema also we can see, we will check the members of course and the security tab, and to see if there is any users that have full rights on it. Actually on these groups you should only add your, for example, as I said before in my beginning of the lab, I have already created a group called TR_IT, and I have put it in most of this Active Directory built-in groups, for example like domain admins, enterprise admins, schema admins. The TR_IT group will be a member of these three built-in groups. So this is the only exception that you can do. Okay, so do not put any other Active Directory group as a member of these built-in groups, like for example schema admins or enterprise admins or domain admins, except your IT group, and that's it. And also this is the also group tr_it will be the only group that also in the security tab to have full access to this Active Directory security group object. Okay, so now we have checked. Domain users should only, in this example, should only have read only. Okay, don't have write. And also in the DNS, you need to make sure to check your DNS and see if there is any user that's having full control on the DNS. Okay, you should also remove any group. Here for example the sales group have access to the DNS or have full rights on the DNS, so you should remove this group from the DNS object. Okay, we will see that in a moment. Right click on properties. Here we can see in the security that there is no users or groups that are added to this DNS object. As I had said before, in this example he's saying that the sales team have access to the DNS server or the DNS object, so you need to remove any Active Directory security groups except for the domain admins, of course, and the DNS admins, which the IT is only members of these groups. Okay, here we can see also that he is telling us to check our group policies objects to see if there is any user that have access to this group policy objects. For example, if you give a user a full access to a group policy object, so he can change the group policy and edit and do everything. So we don't need this to be in any user's hand, we will leave it only to the IT. So we will check and see if actually in specific the domain controller's group policy. We will see here that he is telling us to check the domain controller's group policy and to see if there is any users that have delegation or have access to this group policy object. But as I said before, I only leave the IT guys to have full access to the group policy objects, and this should be a best practice, or this is, you should only give access as full control to the IT guys on anything in the Active Directory structure, Active Directory domain structure. So it is telling us also to check there is something called domain object. Okay, this is not here, we don't have something called exchange trusted. It is telling us, sorry, to check the domain controller. Just a minute. You will check the domain controller, sorry, the domain object. We will see in the properties, in the object security here, that if we have any user in this group, sorry, in this domain object, so we don't have anything in his example. For example, he have a user that have access to the domain object. As I said before, you need only to give the only group that should have access to any Active Directory object and to have full control on it is only the IT group. Okay, so we have finished this part in ACL program. We will now try to use another program. Is called Bloodhound. This is also another tool that HUCA recommends us to use to check our Active Directory security setting. But actually I tried to work with this software or this program, but actually I failed, because actually there is a lot of things required from it. It's not as easy as I thought. So I tried some setting to do, but actually I just forward it, because I tried a lot of things and actually it didn't work at the end. Okay, so I'll try to bypass it. I think now I'll pass it back. So just a minute. Okay, here is another thing that will discuss this. Here actually we have, after this section, we have finished the last part of the Active Directory Security Assessment PDF or documentation for Hyuka. We have finished revising all of the security points and the backup points in this documentation. I have finished it completely, and as I said before, I have another best practice, but this time it is from Microsoft. There is some group policies and some security best practice by Microsoft. You can download it from their website. This is something called Microsoft Security Baseline. This is some documentation for Active Directory best practices and servers best practices and workstation best practices as a documentation, and some group policy that are ready to be deployed. You can take them and import them in your Active Directory so it can be used. This is a best practice or security best practice group policies and documentation from Microsoft. You can download them from their website. I have already downloaded them and downloaded their best practice group policies, and we will check these setting or the setting of these group policies for Microsoft and see what they recommend for our Active Directory. Just a minute. I will put also this security group policies and documentation from Microsoft in the Transformers folder, which I have already uploaded it on my Google Drive link, Google Drive location. I have zipped them and put them in a Google Drive link. I will put this Google Drive link in the description section under the video. So now here we will create a new group policy object, okay, and we will name it Microsoft Server Best Practice or Recommended GPO, and then we will import Microsoft group policy in this newly created group policy. Okay, so here we make another one for Microsoft Windows 10 recommended group policy. And here we will right click and tell him to import the setting. We will go and tell him next and go to our folder that contains Microsoft group policies. Here is the folder. It's called Windows 10 1909. Okay, we need to tell him the location of the group policies. Okay, we need to open and tell him the GPOs. This is the folder that contains Microsoft group policies. Here we can see this is a lot of Microsoft best practice group policies. We will import the one concerning the domain controller, the server domain controller, or the server member service. Okay, here this the server domain controller. We are concerned with the Windows Server 1909 domain controller. We will import this group policy and see what Microsoft recommends us for the security for the domain controller. Next, and then next, and then finish. and then OK, and then we will go and export, or sorry, and import also the setting of, or import the Microsoft Windows 10 1909 workstation best practice group policy. Here it is, there is two group policies, one for the computer and one for the user. So we will choose the choose the computer first, and then we'll make another one for the users. Okay, or we will choose the user and then the computer. We will see now. Well, okay, we will choose first the user, and then we will make another group policy, another new created group policy, and then import the Microsoft recommended computer group policy in it. We will see that now in a moment. So I have imported this for the users, and then we will create a new group policy, and we will name it computer, Windows 10 computer setting. Okay, and then we will import it. We will right click and import, and then next, and then next, and then next, and then we will choose the Windows 10 computer group policy. Okay, and then next, and then next, and then next, and then finish. So now we have imported three group policies, one for the Windows 10 computer, and one for the Windows 10 user, and one for the domain controller. And there is also another group policy for the domain itself. Here we can see that we will tell, just a minute, here we will link, here is three, this is, we have three group policies, 1, 2, 3. We will link the Microsoft server recommended group policy to the domain controllers OU. So we will link this group policy to this OU. Okay, so this group policy will be applied to the domain controllers, and then we will have the Windows 10 computers, okay, group policy to be implemented on the computers organization unit, for example on the robots and the CompuBot. This is the two organizational unit that contains our workstations or our users workstations. So we will have this group policy implemented on these two organizational units which contains our computers. Okay, as for the users, we will link this group policy for the users to be implemented on the AI users, which is the organization unit that contains the Active Directory users of our transformers.local domain. Okay, you just need only, okay, to make it work, you just need to drag and drop. Okay, on, for example, if you need this server GPO to be implemented on domain controllers, you should only drag and drop it on the this OU. Okay, and then if you need the computer, you need to drag and drop this on the computers and robots OU. And as for the user, for users, you need to drag and drop on this organization unit AI users. Okay. Here also we can open the folder for the documentation for the Microsoft group policies. We can now open the group policy setting. Here we can check it from as an HTML file. So Microsoft has the group policy as an object. You can import it, and also gives you the setting of this group policy as an HTML file. So now we can open it. Just a minute. Okay, here we can see, for example, this is the group policy. Okay, let's see, I'll check it from inside. Okay, here we can see that this is the group policy for the Windows server. Here we can see that there is some setting that Microsoft recommends. Okay, just a minute. Here you can see, for example, that in this policy we can see that he, for example, he is access this computer from network. We can see that he is giving some recommendation for the Active Directory groups that should have access to the domain controller. This is the group policy for the domain controller. He is giving us some recommendation that this Active Directory groups that are the allowed groups to access the domain controller. Okay, so this is some best practice for Microsoft administrators, authenticated users, enterprise and whatsoever domain controllers. And here we can see, for example, that to allow log in locally, this is also should be given to the administrators group. And some best practice, for example, for shutting down the domain controller should be also done by the administrators group. Take ownership of files, changing the security setting for the folders and objects on the domain controllers. This also should be done by the administrators. By the way, the domain admins and enterprise admins and schema admins are members of the administrators group. Okay, this is some best practice for Microsoft domain controller group policy. This is recommended best practice by Microsoft. So here we can check and see what my recommendation for using this group policies. You should try them, for example, before implementing them on a wide scale. For example, if you have a lot of domain controllers, you should not implement them once on all of your domain controllers. You should, for example, take a workstation or a virtual machine or whatsoever, something like a test machine, and test this setting on them before implementing them on your domain, and see if this group policy setting will make any conflict with your, for example, current domain controller group policy. So you need to test this setting before implementing them in your network. This is for any group policy recommended by Microsoft or other than Microsoft. Okay, so we can see, for example, user account admin approval mode for built-in administrators. A lot of settings. I think we don't need to know them all, but this is a best practice for Microsoft. Here, for example, this is the firewall. He's giving us some recommendation for some Windows firewall rules. For example, he's following the audit policy. By the way, this audit policies, as I said before, what I mean by audit, it means to inspect. Okay, so there is, as I said before, if you need, for example, on the domain controller to have, for example, to monitor a folder, who is accessing this folder and what he's doing with it, this is called audit. Okay, so in the domain controller there is some group policies called audit policy. So HIUCA is giving some recommendation for the audit policies on the domain controller, and also Microsoft are giving some audit policy recommendations. Okay, and I said before, I saw that HIUCA and Microsoft recommendation both are typical. Okay, so we can see that HIUCA is using the same setting, or Microsoft is using the same setting as HIUCA. So this is also a good thing to know. And also audit policy is not for files and folders. You can audit a user. You can check if a user had access to the domain controller in a certain time or a certain day. This is also called audit. Okay, so this is some best practice for Microsoft to use it. This is some best practice for the domain controller. This is a best practice group policy for the domain controller recommended by Microsoft. Okay, so now we will check and see the Windows 10 user setting, also recommended by Microsoft. We can just run it a little bit faster. Here, for example, we can see that just a minute. There is nothing also in this user this group policy. Now we will check the computer group policy. We'll just check it a little bit further. So this is the setting. We will show all. Now we can see also this is some best practice for Windows 10 computer setting. This is a group policy that Microsoft recommends for Windows 10 computers, Windows 10 computers workstations, or Windows 10 workstations group policy. There is some recommendation. You can see, for example, some Windows 10 firewall groups, firewall group policy, and some audit policies also. For example, here we can see that Microsoft is saying that the user should not be able to or prevent enabling camera. Here is saying that the user should not enable the camera. He is enabling this setting to prevent enabling lock screen camera. This is the user should not enable lock screen camera or even enable lock screen slide show. This is a recommended setting by Microsoft, and this is done on the computer setting. Okay, so any user on a computer should not be able to enable the camera. Okay, this is a best practice recommendation from Microsoft. And enable here, for example, we can see that enable local admin password management. For in another lab or in another video we were discussing how to use labs. This is a Microsoft solution that is used to change the local administrator password on every PC in your domain periodically. For example, for example, if you want to change it every 3 months, this tool or utility can change the password for the local administrator for all your workstations in the domain automatically every period of time. For example, every 3 months, 9 as you prefer, and it will be a complex password, and it will be created randomly. Okay, with a very complex password. Okay, so here we're saying to us that you should enable local admin password management by this, or to enable to change the local administrator password using the labs software by Microsoft. So this also should be enabled, so we can be able to change the local administrator password on all of our workstations in the domain. Okay, this is a lot of things. You can revise it. I am just giving some bits and pieces, or the important points in this group policy. For example, here is giving us a maximum log size for the different event logs sections. For example, as I said before, in the event viewer there is some sections. As I said before, event viewer, this is the place where all of the Windows activity are recorded, and I said before it is divided to three parts: security, application, and system, and every one of them is concerning or is recording a certain type of Windows activity. For example, in the application you will see that the event log is recording the application errors for the Windows. In the security it is recording the security events, for example, like a user login and log off. It will be recorded in the security log section. For example, in the system, if there is any error concerning the Windows, for example, if the Windows failed to shut down or something, this will be recorded in the system section. There is something in the event logs that it is recording these events until the size of the log file reaches a certain size, or a certain kilobyte or megabyte size, and then it will begin deleting the old records, deleting from the old records to the newest records. So here in this group policy we are specifying when the Windows should be or when the event viewer should begin erasing the old records, when, for example, when the security log reaches this size. It is in kilobyte. For example, this is 32 megabyte. Here this is 169 or 196 megabyte, and this is 32 megabytes. So we are just telling the event viewer log, when you reach for example, when the security log reaches this side, begin deleting the old logs to the newest logs. And this is also done in the system and application. So this is also done through a group policy. We are specifying when the event log should begin erasing the records of the events. Okay, when should it begin deleting old files, or when should it begin stop recording, okay, and then erase the old files and then begin recording again. Okay, this is done through the maximum log size. So you can just check this group policy setting by yourself. So here now I also have found a group policy concerning the domain itself. Okay, not only the domain controllers, there is a recommended group policy for the domain as a whole by Microsoft. So also we will import this group policy. Just a minute. Okay, we will make a new group policy and we will name it Microsoft recommended default domain policy. Domain default policy. And we will import it and see the setting of it also as well. And also there is a group policy done by Microsoft for the Windows Defender. This is also some best practice group policy concerning how to manage or how to increase the efficiency or increase the efficiency of the Windows Defender. Okay, also we will import the domain security. Okay, this is default domain. This is also another one for the Windows Defender. This is a group policy for the Windows Defender for both Windows 10 and Windows Server. Okay, this is a best practice on how to manage and increase the efficiency of Windows Defender on both Windows 10 and Windows Server. Okay, and also, as I said before, there is some best practice for the default domain group policy by Microsoft. I think let's pass it real quickly. Here we can see this is some best practice for the domain. Just pass it a little bit quickly again. Okay, here is for example some, sorry, you can get back. Here we can see that Microsoft is recommending, for example, some password lengths. For example, he is recommending that the passwords for the Active Directory user accounts to be 14 characters and to have a password history for 24 passwords to be remembered. Here this is the number that, for example, you have set your password with 24 different characters. The number 25th password should not be, or the 25th password should not be any one of the previous 24. For example, if you have done a lot of passwords and then in the 25th you try to repeat any of the previous 24 passwords, it will not enable you, okay, or it will not allow you. So this is some password policy setting recommended by Microsoft. Here, for example, the account lockout duration. For example, if a user type the password incorrectly for example 3, or for example if he is trying to type the password and he failed for 10 times, then his account should be locked for 15 minutes, and then after 15 minutes it will be opened again. Okay, here for example reset account lock counter. Here for example he will reset the password, or he will remove the lock on the account after 15 minutes. Okay, sorry, I think this is one for the 15 minutes. I don't know what this setting is, but as a whole this is a best practice password policy setting from Microsoft. So now we have the Windows Defender. This is, I think I should use it because actually I don't have any antivirus set up on my workstations. I'm only using the Windows Defender, so I will use this Microsoft best practice Windows Defender group policy and make it applied on my Windows workstations domain, okay, or on my workstations in the domain. Here we can see that this is the setting for the Windows Defender. It's having some setting. Okay, he is opening some, for example, joining Microsoft Maps. This is the service to join Microsoft to increase the efficiency of the Windows Defender. This website, or this Microsoft Maps, contains the latest let's say the latest blacklist, or the latest files for protecting your workstation from malware and something like this. So you will make it Microsoft Windows Defender recommended group policy, and then OK. And now we will link it, or we'll make it be, and we will apply it on. First we'll import the setting. Okay, Windows Defender, and then next, and then next, finish, and then we will make it to be applied on the CompuBot and robots organization unit. Okay, so we'll make them, or link them to these two OUs. We will drag and drop. Here we'll drag and drop on the robots, which contains our workstations, and also on the CompuBot, which contains also our workstations. So we'll make this Windows Defender group policy to be applied on both OUs that contains our workstations in our domain. So I think this is the end of our video. Let's have a little look. Okay, so now this is, as I said before, this is the last video concerning the discussion of HIUCA documentation, which is called Active Directory Security Assessment. Thank you, HIUCA, for your magnificent PDF or the documentation for enhancing and testing our Active Directory security setting. Well, this is, as I said before, the last video concerning this documentation, and in the upcoming videos I will begin working or discussing how to set up a WSOS and how to change our group policy to make our workstations verify that there is a WSOS in our domain and to connect to it to get the latest Windows updates. Okay, so until I see you all the next video, I hope this was informative for you and would like you to thank you all for viewing. Thank you.